Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about a solved case from the northwest of England, the case of Clare Wood. She was a young woman and mother of one who tragically became the victim of a horrific murder in early 2009. And as soon as her body was found, a huge manhunt operation ensued to try and find her killer. The detectives knew who the perpetrator was straight away. They knew exactly who had committed this awful crime. The reason being because he was well known to the police. Clare had gone to the authorities about him herself a number of times in the lead up to her death due to his harassment and abuse of her, which begs the question of, if Clare had gone to the police for help from this man, then how could this still have happened? How on earth was she not protected from the evil monster that would eventually go on to end her life? This case sparked nationwide outrage and a demand for a change in the law surrounding the rights of future domestic abuse victims, a change which Clare's own father was determined to make happen in his daughter's name if it was the last thing he ever did. Let's delve into the devastating case of Clare Wood. But just quickly before we get into the case, please listen carefully to the following. This video contains heavy themes such as harassment and stalking, sexual assault, domestic violence and abuse, including mental, emotional and physical abuse and coercive control, and topics such as depression, bipolar disorder and suicide are also mentioned. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back more than 15 years now to early 2009 in Salford, which is a city located in Greater Manchester in the northwest of England. And this is Clare Wood. She was a 36-year-old woman who lived in Salford. Now, Clare was originally from West Yorkshire. I believe that's where she grew up, and she came from a family of four. She had a younger brother named Adam, her mother was named Sheila, and her father was named Michael. And according to one article, Michael wasn't Clare and Adam's biological father, but he adopted the kids when he got married to their mother, Sheila. And yeah, they were a happy little family. And Clare was described by her father Michael as just being such a lovely girl growing up. She was always so upbeat and enthusiastic and gregarious. Clare was the kind of person that could just chat to anyone, really. She was so sociable and easygoing. She was very strong-minded and determined. Michael said that Clare always kind of had the mindset of, you know, I'm going to take on the world. I'm going to do whatever I set my mind to. She grew into a very headstrong young woman who was full of life and was always up for a laugh. For Michael, Clare was all that he could have wanted, all that he could have asked for in a daughter. Clare's brother Adam described his big sister as being someone who was always very affectionate growing up. She always wanted hugs and cuddles. And Adam said that Clare was also just incredibly kind. As an adult, Clare never really had that much money, but Adam said that she would literally give you her very last penny if she thought that you needed it, if she thought that it would help you out. She was a very generous person. As a child, Clare did all the kind of typical things that young girls like to do. So for example, she went to the Brownies, she went to Guides, which is basically what we call the Girl Scouts here in the UK for my American viewers. I used to love going to the Brownies. At 16 years old, Clare finished school, she left school and she started working in a clothing factory. And when she turned 18, she again started doing the kind of typical things that other young women were doing. She started going out to pubs and clubs. She would often travel into Manchester and go to the clubs there. And actually, that is where she met the man that she would go on to marry. I couldn't find his name anywhere online, but she met this man in a club. They got on really well, they started dating. And in 1999, when Clare was around 29 years old, the two married and actually had a baby. They had a little baby girl who they named Maddie. So Clare was now a mother and she settled with her family of three in a house in Manchester. But unfortunately, this marriage wasn't to last. Clare and her husband were together for about 8 years or so before they decided to separate, which actually Clare's family were very disappointed about. They really liked Clare's partner. In fact, her father Michael even described him as being, quote, the ideal son-in-law. But alas, it wasn't to be. They separated and her ex-husband had kind of main custody of their daughter Maddie. Apparently Maddie would stay with her father in the week and then she would spend the weekends with Clare. So Clare was still actively involved in Maddie's life. And Maddie has lovely memories memories of her mum. She has memories of her singing around the house all the time. She would always hear her mum singing, and she would tell her that she should go on the X Factor. And she also recalled how her mum was always a very creative person. She loved art and design, which definitely influenced Maddie to love it too. But of course, after Clare's separation from her husband, life was very different for her now. She'd gone from living in, I would imagine, a very busy and loud household with her partner and young child to now living on her own in a flat in Salford. So it was a big adjustment, and it was lonely for Clare. She did battle with loneliness, and I believe it was following all of this when Clare was actually diagnosed with both bipolar disorder and depression. So she was struggling a lot with her mental health at this time, but she was getting help for it. She had gone to the doctors and she was receiving support. But because of this loneliness that she felt, Clare decided to turn to social media to connect with new people online. Specifically, she was looking for love online. She was ready to start dating again, and so she started talking to different men on online dating websites. And in April of 2007, she started speaking to a new man on one of the sites. His name was George Appleton. He was about 4 years older than Clare. He was 40 when this case occurred, and obviously Clare was 36. George also lived in Manchester, and he worked at a fairground. I think he would work on one of those stalls at the fairground, you know, where kids can play those games to try and win a toy or a stuffed animal or something. He would operate those. And yeah, he and Clare started chatting, sending each other messages, and they became really friendly with each other. They actually became very close. They would tell one another about their lives, their hobbies, what they'd been up to that day, and Clare just thought that George seemed like such a nice man. He seemed very friendly and charming, and she seemed to feel the exact same about him when they met in person too. They really hit it off and they started dating. George and Clare got into a relationship, and initially George Appleton, to be honest, appeared to be just the perfect guy. He was very loving and affectionate. He would tell Clare that he would always be there for her. He was going to look after her. He would take Clare and her daughter Maddie for days out and treat them. He seemed like a knight in shining armour almost, and Clare fell head over heels for him. In fact, she was adamant that she was going to marry this man one day, and so she was very excited when it came to introducing her new boyfriend George Appleton to her family. Not long after they became an item, Clare introduced George to her loved ones. However, it's fair to say that they weren't so taken by George Appleton. Her father Michael and brother Adam actually took a pretty instant disliking to this man as soon as they met him. Adam didn't like George because, well, firstly, when Clare turned up to her brother's house with George, he'd driven both Clare and Clare's young daughter Maddie there in this very old rundown car, which Adam described as being a quote death trap. So that already put a bit of a sour taste in Adam's mouth about George Appleton, because he was just thinking, why have you driven my sister and my little niece here in a car that is clearly not safe to drive at all? But reason number two as to why he took an instant disliking to George was because basically whilst they were at Adam's house, Adam was finishing off some work on his computer as Clare and George were speaking to him, and he remembered George saying something along the lines of, oh yeah, I'm really good with computers. I actually managed to hack into my ex-girlfriend's email account, which naturally just made Adam think, what on earth? You've just openly admitted that you've hacked into your ex's email, which is a complete invasion of privacy, and you're saying it as if it's something to be proud of. It was just so strange. Adam really did not like this George Appleton at all, and neither did Clare's father Michael. He too thought that he was bad news right from the moment that his daughter introduced Appleton to him. Michael couldn't even necessarily pinpoint exactly why he didn't like Appleton, but it was almost just like a father's intuition. He just had this gut instinct that George Appleton was not someone to be trusted. And this was only made worse when Clare told her father that George had actually been to prison before. She told her dad that he served time behind bars for motoring offences, which just that in itself was a red flag for Michael, because you see, Michael actually worked as a prison officer, and he had done for a very long time, and he knew that it was very rare for someone's punishment for motoring offences was to be locked up unless it was incredibly serious. So Michael just didn't believe that. He just had a gut feeling that Appleton was lying to Claire, lying about the real reason he'd gone to prison. And as it would turn out, Michael was right. George Appleton had done time behind bars, but of course it wasn't for motoring offences. It was actually for crimes which were a hell of a lot more serious. He'd been arrested several times for crimes involving violence towards women. He'd been arrested for stalking and harassing different women, sexually assaulting women, kidnapped. One time he was even arrested for holding a knife to a woman's throat. This was an incredibly dangerous man that Claire had welcomed into her life, and she had no idea. She was none the wiser that the man she'd fallen in love with, the man that she desperately wanted to marry someday, was a violent sexual predator and abuser. Something else that Claire had no idea about was that George Appleton had a history of abusing the women that he was in relationships with. About 3 years before George and Claire met and got together, he had been in a relationship with another woman named Carol Agnew. And initially, Carol thought much the same about George as Claire did when they first met. She too thought that George seemed like a really nice, gentle, charming guy, and she fell for him. However, it seems as though this nice and friendly demeanour was just a mask that George Appleton would wear, a mask that soon slipped as his true colours quickly began to emerge. Carol eventually started noticing these changes in George Appleton and his behaviour. So for example, she noticed that he started lying a lot. She would catch him out on things that he had lied about. She also noticed that he had a very short temper. He was quick to anger, and he started to become very possessive and controlling of Carol. If she wanted to do something without him, like go shopping or something, well, he hated that. He always had to be there with her. It was like he had to know what she was doing and who she was with at all times. He was abusive. This was a form of domestic abuse, but not only was he controlling and mentally and emotionally abusive towards Carol, he also became physically abusive too. As I said, he could be a very, very violent man. And on one occasion, during an argument, he actually put his hands around Carol's throat and started to squeeze. Thankfully, as he was doing this, Carol's son walked into the room and George released his grip. But I dread to think what would have happened had he not. I mean, would he have strangled Carol to death? Because of all of this abuse, Carol eventually ended things with George. She split up with him, but to say that he did not take this well would be an understatement. He was furious with Carol for breaking up with him. So furious that he started literally threatening her. He would threaten to beat her up, threaten to kill her. He would just not leave her alone simply because she rejected him, which must have just been awful. I can't imagine how terrifying this period of her life must have been for Carol. And it's also terrifying because Carol had no reason to think that things would turn out like this at the start of their relationship. As I said in the beginning, George Appleton just seemed like the nicest, most gentlemanly man. There's no way that she could have predicted that he was in fact this vile abuser. She couldn't have seen it coming, and so neither did Claire. When they met and their relationship began in the spring of 2007, she too thought that George Appleton was this perfect man and partner, because that's the act that he put on at the start to reel her in. He pretended to be this lovely, caring guy to get Claire to fall in love with him, and then once she had, that was when Claire started to see this different, very, very dark side of him. It wasn't long before George started to exhibit his controlling and possessive behaviours over Claire, just like he had done with Carol. He became very jealous of Claire, constantly checking who she was speaking to, who she was messaging on her social media accounts like her Facebook. He started getting angry when Claire expressed that she wanted to go out without him or do something without him. He would tell her what she could do, what she couldn't do, who she could see, who she couldn't see. It was just horrendous for Claire. And her daughter Maddie was very young at the time that this was all happening. She was only about 9 years old, but she just remembers her mum and George arguing all the time. It was like the flick of a switch almost. Maddie says that they went from being so happy together to just arguing constantly because of George's abuse. He also began trying to isolate Claire as much as he could from her friends and family. She hardly saw them nearly as much as she used to. And it's believed that he was doing this because he wanted her to be completely reliant on him and him only. He clearly knew that Claire suffered with her mental health. She was very vulnerable, and he clearly thought that if he could cut off her contact with the majority of her loved ones, then it would make her even more vulnerable and she would be even more reliant on him, which is what he wanted. He didn't want anyone else in the picture, probably because he didn't want anyone to see or witness the extent of the abuse that she was suffering at his hands. And also, if she was fully reliant on him, then he probably thought that she was more likely to just take it, put up with the controlling and abusive behaviour, because he was all she had. And I mean, it was working. As time went on, Claire was kind of straying more and more from her friends and family, and I believe they had absolutely no idea what was going on between Claire and George. I mean, if you think about it, Claire's family didn't see her that often anyway, because I think most of them still lived in Yorkshire, and obviously she lived in Salford in Manchester, so the majority of the time Claire was just in contact with them via the phone. And yeah, she didn't really confide in anyone about how she was being treated, maybe because she didn't want them to worry about her, but also probably because she was scared, thinking, what would the consequences be if she did tell someone? What would George do? But the relationship between George and Claire seemed to finally come to a head, I believe about 6 months in, when Claire actually discovered that George was cheating on her. As well as being controlling and abusive, he was also being unfaithful. She found out that he was having affairs with 4 other women, not just 1, 4. He was messaging and flirting with these women through online messages and meeting up with them, and this was the final straw for Claire. This was it. She was done. And so she officially broke up with George Appleton. She told him that she didn't want to be with him anymore. She'd even written George a letter, which was later found by her father Michael in the back of one of her notebooks. I don't believe she ever actually sent it, but it read, quote, "Dear George, there is no easy way to say this, but I don't want to be with you. Too much has happened. I can't ever trust you, no matter what you do. I've tried, but don't feel the way you do about the 2 of us. I'm so unhappy. I'm at the stage where I don't even like you touching me, and that feeling is never going to go, because I know that your body has been with several people in the most intimate way. You still scare me, and I can't be with someone I'm frightened of. Don't contact me. That's the way it needs to be. I need to get on with my life. If you have any feeling for me, you will let me do this. I have to consider my daughter also, and after all you have done, I can't have you back. It's not fair on her, and she knows I would never be happy with you. She can never trust you either. Take care. I mean it, Claire." But of course we know that George Appleton couldn't handle rejection from women, don't we? So there was no way he was going to just accept this breakup. No way he was going to make this easy for Claire. He wouldn't leave her alone. He refused to just let her be and get on with her life, and he started harassing her pretty much. For months and months he was harassing her. He was trying to text her and call her all the time. He would just turn up at her house without asking in the middle of the night, and when Claire wouldn't let him in, he would start shouting and banging on her door. He would kick in her walls. At one point he even smashed her window to try and get inside. He would shout abuse at Claire, threatening her, threatening to hurt her. He said that he was going to set her house on fire with her inside of it. I mean, can you imagine how frightened she must have been? She was so frightened that she decided to go to the police. On the 7th of October 2008, she went to the Pendleton police station in Salford to report George Appleton for criminal damage, for damaging her house, and for harassment. So the police took a statement from Claire, although the very next day, she called them again when George Appleton once again turned up at her home and began banging on her door trying to get in, and so he was arrested. He was taken into custody, but he wasn't kept there for very long before he was released on bail pending further investigation. Now, the terms of his bail were that he was not allowed any contact with Claire. He wasn't allowed to text her, call her, go to her house. He wasn't allowed anywhere near her. But of course that wasn't going to stop someone like George Appleton. He didn't give a damn about these bail conditions, to be honest, and he continued stalking Claire. He still went to her house and would just watch her. He would peek over her garden fence. It was like he wanted her to know that he was always going to be there. He was going to be watching her constantly. He wanted to intimidate her. It was like he was invoking this fear in her. It's vile. So the harassment continued, the threats continued, and as you can imagine, the impact impact that this had on Claire was just enormous. He'd been bullying and intimidating her relentlessly and for so long that she almost became a different person. Her father Michael said that she went from being this outgoing, happy woman to suddenly being the complete opposite, really. I think she just became a lot more introverted and quiet. She just really went into her shell. She lost her sparkle. But she did try to kind of get back to normal, get back to her usual self as much as she could. Apparently she began seeking help from this independent domestic abuse charity in Salford just so that she could get some advice and support. And they were able to help Claire by just doing things for her that would just kind of make her feel a bit safer in her own home, because obviously she did live on her own. So for example, they helped her change her locks and made sure that her windows were secure. They fitted smoke alarms because, as we know, Appleton had threatened to burn her house down, so she was really scared of that. They also, I think, like blocked off her letterbox to stop anyone from putting anything through it. So for example, to stop George Appleton from putting a petrol bomb through it or something. And I believe she also had a panic alarm installed as well. So it seems as though gradually, as a result of all of this, she was starting to feel a bit more at ease. And so in November of 2008, just the month after she went to the police about George Appleton's harassment, Claire contacted them again. She actually wrote a letter to the officer who was dealing with her case, and she requested that the charges against Appleton be dropped. Like I said, she was feeling a bit safer, and apparently Appleton had started to back off a little bit and leave her alone at this point. So she felt okay asking for this investigation not to be taken any further. It's speculated that Claire probably felt sorry for George Appleton. I mean, she didn't want any of this. She didn't want to have to go to the police and be having to give statements. Despite all of the horrendous abuse, she wanted her and George to end things amicably. And so, yeah, once Appleton had started to back off, she felt safe enough to request that the charges against him be dropped, thinking that finally they could both her and George, could just get on with their separate lives. And that is quite a common thing to happen in domestic abuse cases, actually. Often the victim will decide to drop charges either out of fear, or they'll decide to drop them when things seem to get better, because at the end of the day, this was someone that they loved. George was someone that Claire once loved. And again, despite everything that he had done, she didn't want to see George Appleton locked up, and she wanted to believe that he had changed and that he was truly going to leave her alone now. And life seemed to finally start improving for Claire. That December, she had a really lovely Christmas with her family in Yorkshire. She got to see all of her extended family. She also spent the New Year with them, and her brother Adam just said that they had such a great time. They had a laugh. It was so nice to spend the festive period with his big sister. And according to one source, it was during this time when Claire finally told her father Michael about everything that had happened with Appleton. She told him the reason that they weren't together anymore was because he had been harassing and abusing her. And apparently Michael tried to convince Claire to move back to Yorkshire. Obviously he was so worried about her. He didn't want her to be in Manchester alone. But Claire was adamant that no, she was not going to let George Appleton drive her out of Salford, out of the place that she now called home. She wasn't going to let him have that control anymore. And so after Christmas and New Year of 2008, she said goodbye to her family and returned to her house in Salford. But little did Michael Brown know that that would be the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. As it would turn out, George Appleton's step back, I guess, from Claire's life was only temporary. He probably only started to leave her alone for a short while in the hopes that she would drop the charges, which of course she did. And so in the new year of 2009, the harassment started up once more. And in fact, on the 18th of January 2009, Clare Wood contacted the police again, this time to report that George Appleton had just confronted her, I believe at her address, and he sexually assaulted her. So George Appleton was arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and attempted rape. However, following his interview, he was once again released on bail pending further investigation because the police didn't have enough evidence to press charges. And once again, his bail conditions were that he wasn't allowed any form of contact with Claire whatsoever. But just as he did before, he completely ignored ignored this. He continued trying to call her and message her online via social media, and of course Claire was blocking him on social media constantly, but every time she did, he would just set up a new account that he could message her on, and then when she blocked him on that account, he would set up a new one again. And he was furious with Claire. He was so angry at her for reporting him to the police again for the sexual assault, because he thought that he had control of her again. When she dropped the charges the first time, he thought that he could now regain control of this situation. So when she went to the police in January of 2009, he was enraged. It was like in his mind, he was thinking, how dare you? How dare you report me to the police? And he wasn't going to let Claire get away with this. He was going to take revenge on her. And if she was so adamant that she wouldn't give in and take him back, then he would have to take matters into his own hands and make sure that no one else would have Claire either. If he couldn't have her, then no one could. In early February of 2009, concern for Clare Wood was raised when her family realised that no one had actually heard from her in a little while. The date was the 5th of February 2009, and that day Claire's father, Michael Brown, actually contacted his daughter's ex-husband and the father of her child, because Michael was growing worried as it had been a good few days and he hadn't heard anything from Claire. She hadn't texted him or phoned him. He'd been trying to call her, but she wasn't picking up. But obviously he lived miles and miles away in Yorkshire, so he couldn't just pop round to Claire's house to check on her. And so, as I said, he decided to call Claire's ex-husband and just ask him to pop round to Claire's house when he got a chance, to just check that she was all right, and also to tell her to phone her dad because he was concerned about her. And so the following day, that is exactly what he did. On the 6th of February 2009, Claire's ex-husband went over to her house and he let himself inside. I'm assuming that he probably had his own key or something for when he would drop their daughter Maddie off to stay with her mum. Anyway, he went into the house, he started walking around looking for Claire, and it was when he reached her bedroom that he came across the most gruesome, horrendous scene. In that bedroom, lying on the bed, was his ex-wife and the mother of his child, Clare Wood, and she was dead. But not only was she dead, but it was clear that she had been horrifically murdered. It was later determined that her cause of death was strangulation. She'd been strangled to death in her own home. She'd also been raped, and then an attempt was made by the perpetrator after she was dead to set fire to her bed and her body to obviously destroy evidence. According to one source, they'd actually placed an ashtray on top of Claire before fleeing the scene, and this was clearly done to try and make it look as though Claire had been smoking in bed and that was what caused the fire and what caused her death. And it was actually established that Claire had been murdered about 4 days before her body was found on the 2nd of February, hence why there had been no word from her. So as soon as her body was found, Claire's ex-husband called the police and a murder investigation was quickly launched. And of course, the Greater Manchester Police knew instantly who had done this. They had their top suspect right from the very beginning. It was Claire's vile and abusive ex-boyfriend, George Appleton, the man that she had gone to the police about in the months leading up to her death 4 times. So now the police needed to find him, but as it would turn out, this would be a lot trickier than the detectives first anticipated, because it seemed as though George Appleton had gone on the run following Claire's murder. And so a huge manhunt operation began. The police knew that they had to find and apprehend George Appleton as quickly as possible because he was such a danger to the public. But I mean, the huge issue was he could have been anywhere by this point. Like I said, Claire's body wasn't found until 4 whole days after she'd been killed. So Appleton had a head start. Who knows where he could have got to in that time? I mean, he could have fled the country. So because of this, the police knew that they were going to need all the help that they could get in order to find him, and so they quickly appealed to the public. They actually released CCTV footage that they had obtained of him using an ATM machine on the 5th of February. They released pictures of him and they urged anyone who may have seen him or who may hear from him to get in touch with the authorities immediately. And the police even appealed to George Appleton directly. They went on TV and spoke directly to him, urging him to hand himself in and get in contact. This was on the 10th of February 2009, by the way, so 4 days after Claire was found dead. And this case was all over the news. It didn't just hit the headlines in Manchester, it was all over the country. Everyone knew what had happened to Claire and the fact that her suspected killer was on the run, and everyone was just waiting for any updates, waiting for the news that Appleton had been tracked down and arrested. And on the 12th of February 2009, 10 whole days after Claire's death and 6 days after her body was found, there was a major development in this investigation. News broke that George Appleton had finally been found. However, in a shocking turn of events, it was revealed that he'd been found dead too. George Appleton's body was located in an old, derelict, unused pub in Salford, and this pub was located literally only about half a mile away from Claire's home. So there had been this whole huge nationwide manhunt for this man, and yet he would be found just half a mile away from the crime scene. It was established that George Appleton had killed himself. He'd probably seen his face all over the news. He knew the police were looking for him, and he didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. He didn't want to go to prison for killing Claire, and so he ended it. He took his own life. Of course, had he been found alive, the detectives would have charged him with Claire's rape and murder. They had the evidence that it was him who had committed this horrific crime, as well as his history of abuse towards Claire and the fact that he'd gone on the run. They also found his DNA on a cigarette butt in her home, directly tying him to the crime scene, so he would have been convicted. But obviously now he was never going to be brought to justice. Claire's loved ones were never going to get answers from him as to why he did this. They were never going to see their daughter's evil killer locked up for life, because for George Appleton, it was all about control. And in one final act of having complete control of the situation, he committed suicide. In the aftermath of Claire's murder, an inquiry was launched to take a close look at Greater Manchester Police's handling of her case, because as you can imagine, the police really came under fire when it was revealed that Claire had gone to them 4 times in the lead up to her death to report George Appleton's harassment and abuse. Understandably, people were questioning if she had gone to the police on 4 separate occasions asking for their help, then how the hell could this still have happened? Why wasn't Claire protected from this man? So yeah, a review was launched by the Independent Police Complaints Commission in 2011, and the conclusion of this review was, of course, that yes, Claire had been failed. She'd been let down by both, quote, individual and systemic failures by Greater Manchester Police. It was noted that there had been, quote, individual failings by officers who demonstrated in some cases a shocking lack of understanding about the nature of domestic violence. So it seems as though from that some of the officers that were dealing with Claire's report weren't even properly educated themselves on abusive relationships. And the report also stated that, quote, more could and should have been done to provide Claire with the support and protection she needed. But it cannot be said that the failures by Greater Manchester Police or individual officers led to her death. Now, it also emerged during the inquiry that whilst the police were, of course, aware of George Appleton's violent past, aware of his abuse towards other women and previous partners before Claire, they were not allowed to disclose this to Claire and warn her when she reported him because of data protection laws in place at the time, which, as you can imagine, really angered people, especially Claire's family, because they were certain that had Claire known about George's violent past, she would have never gotten into a relationship with him in the first place, and this never would have happened. And surely that is something that everyone should have a right to know, whether your partner has been arrested or convicted of abuse or assault. Surely that's just common sense. Well, that's the way that Claire's father, Michael Brown, saw it anyway. He strongly believed that more needed to be done to protect victims of domestic violence. And so in the aftermath of his daughter's death, he became an activist. He started campaigning for a change in these data protection laws in the UK. Michael started campaigning for Claire's Law, which would make it possible for people to be able to go to the police and ask if someone that they are dating has a history of violence or abuse, so that they can make an informed decision as to whether they want to, you know, continue the relationship or seek further help and support if they feel that they may be at risk. He campaigned alongside local journalist Michelle Livesey and Labour MP Hazel Blairs, and they just tried to spread the word on what they were proposing, this new law, as much as they possibly could, just trying to get as much attention and backing as possible. Michael did countless interviews, he spoke at women's domestic violence groups, he spoke to Parliament at the Palace of Westminster. He worked tirelessly for years to try and make this change in the system, and thankfully all of his hard work eventually paid off. After meeting with the government's Home Secretary at the time, Theresa May, a pilot scheme was launched in September of 2012. So kind of like a trial run of Clare's Law was implemented across just 4 police forces in England, including the Greater Manchester Police Force. So it was only in effect in certain areas initially. However, in 2014, Clare's Law, or the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme as it's also known, was officially launched across all police forces in England and Wales. And within the first 10 months, there were more than 1,500 applications made by people requesting information on a partner's criminal history, whether they had a history of violence. So I have no doubt that Clare's Law has saved so many lives since its launch, saved so many women and men from suffering domestic abuse and violence. And it's all thanks to Clare's father, Michael Brown, and the incredible team that he had around him. Sadly, Michael Brown is deceased now. He passed away in hospital in 2020 after a short illness. But I mean, he'll always be remembered, won't he, for the amazing work that he did following his daughter's death. Clare's Law is a lasting legacy for both Michael and Clare. Now, shortly after the 15-year anniversary of Clare Wood's murder, just earlier this year in March of 2024, Clare's daughter Maddie actually appeared on BBC News. Maddie was just 10 years old when her mother was tragically taken away from her. So today she is around the same age as me, actually. She's around like 25, 26, I think. But yeah, she appeared on BBC News to talk about Clare's Law and how, unfortunately, in recent years, the scheme hasn't actually been as effective as it could be, as police's response to applications in some areas of the country was taking a lot longer than it should. So basically, just to give you a bit of background on how Clare's Law works, if you are looking to request information about a partner's past, you can either go directly to a police station or you can apply online through your local police force. You fill out this online form about yourself and the person you are requesting information on, and then the police are expected to get back to you within 28 days. However, it was found that in recent times, some police forces across the country were taking much longer than that to get back to people. Literally hundreds and hundreds of days in some cases. And also it was found that the actual disclosure rate had dropped. So for instance, in 2018 to 2019, 48% of applications were responded to with data by the police, whereas in 2022 to 2023, this dropped by 10%. The disclosure rate dropped to 38%. So yeah, Maddie spoke about this, spoke about her frustration at these shocking delays on BBC News. I mean, it's just not really good enough, is it, for police forces to take months and months to respond to people with critical information about someone that could potentially endanger their lives. It's not good enough. Now, it is important to note that in the last 5 years, there has been a 300% rise in the amount of people putting in Clare's Law applications. So that does, I guess, give some context as to why it is taking longer for some police forces to respond. However, the National Police Chiefs Council and the Home Office has acknowledged that despite this rise, they know that they could and should be doing better across the country. So hopefully these issues are being addressed and, resources are being put into reducing the delays. And Maddie has just been making effort to try and raise awareness of this, raise awareness of the delays in the hopes that they are reduced, and just continue to spread the word on Clare's Law in general, because despite these setbacks, I suppose, it is still an incredible scheme that has the potential to save lives and has saved lives. And Maddie urges people who think that they may be seeing red flags or alarm bells in someone that they're dating to still go and apply for the disclosure scheme. But also, if you are in an area in England and Wales where police forces are taking longer than they should to get back to you, then Maddie encourages people to just trust themselves, trust your gut. If you have a gut feeling that something isn't right, listen to it and leave. Get yourself out of that situation or reach out for help whilst you wait for the disclosure. I will leave some information about Clare's Law and how you can make an application in the description box below, as well as some domestic abuse helplines if anyone watching feels as though they need them. They are there. And that concludes this case. That is the heartbreaking case of Clare Wood. A really, really devastating story. What happened to Clare is just horrific. But like I said, Clare's law is such an incredible legacy in her name, and I'm sure that Clare would have been so proud of all of the work that her father Michael did in the aftermath of her murder. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. They can be solved cases, unsolved cases, serial killer cases. Again, you can pop them in the comments down below, or alternatively I have a case request form linked in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye.